Chapter 7. Disappointment at First Sight. The next morning, Catherine was at the Tilneys' lodgings, ready to begin her journey to Northanger Abbey. She was unusually nervous, wanting to do exactly what was right to maintain her new friend's high opinion of her. But she had no need to worry. Miss Tilney's good manners and Henry's smile soon drove away any anxious feelings, and General Tilney welcomed her very warmly and looked after her every need. Even Captain Tilney appeared in the sitting-room to wish them all a safe journey, although Catherine heard him whisper to Eleanor, "How glad I shall be when you're all on your way home." Catherine joined Eleanor and a servant inside one carriage. Henry and General Tilney were in the front carriage, with Henry driving. Finally, the journey of 30 miles from Bath to Northanger Abbey began. Our heroine relaxed and enjoyed Eleanor's company as she observed a road that was entirely new to her. She looked back at Bath without regret, excited about being with Eleanor and Henry and about spending time in a real abbey. After 2 hours, which flew by for Catherine, the carriages stopped for lunch. Catherine could not help noticing the General's habit of giving orders and dominating every conversation. He gave his opinion about the journey, about the inn at which they had stopped, the service of the waiters, the quality of the food, and even about the weather. Eleanor and Henry spoke very little when their father was part of the group, and Catherine felt a sense of relief when it was time to return to the carriages and get away from General Tilney. But the General delighted her with a surprising suggestion.
"The day is very fine, Miss Morland, and I think you would see more of this beautiful countryside if you took my place with Henry at the top of the front carriage."
And so Catherine found herself sitting beside Henry, as happy as any girl who ever existed. And Henry drove so well. He did not swear or congratulate himself on his ability with horses, and he seemed to enjoy making conversation with Catherine. Sitting beside him in his carriage was almost as good as dancing with him.
"My sister is very happy that you're coming to Northanger Abbey as her guest. She does not have a true friend in the neighbourhood, and is looking forward to this time with you."
"But you are with her most of the time, aren't you?"
"Northanger is my home for about half of my time. I have my own house in Woodston, which is nearly 20 miles from my father's house, and I must spend some of my time there, in my parish. Of course, I am always sorry to leave Eleanor."
"And the Abbey? You must be very fond of the Abbey."
Henry smiled and said, "You seem to have formed a very positive view of Northanger Abbey."
"Yes, I think I have. It is a fine old place, isn't it? Like the kind of places one reads about in Mrs. Radcliffe's novels."
"And are you prepared to meet the type of frightening experiences that may occur in such houses? Do you have a brave heart? Are your nerves strong enough for secret rooms and hidden staircases?" said Henry in a low, quiet voice.
"Oh, yes," cried Catherine. "But I will not be easily frightened with so many people in the house. We are not returning to it after it has stood empty for years and no one expects us. I have read about that kind of thing happening in novels, and then mysterious and scary things occur."
"No, that is certainly not the case at Northanger. We shall not have to feel our way along a dark hall, with only the dying coals of a distant fire to light our way. Nor will we have to make our beds on the floor of a room without windows, doors, or furniture. I am sure you have read about such circumstances too, in one of your favourite novels," suggested Henry. "Of course, as is the custom in old houses," he continued, in his dramatically low voice. "You will be in a separate part of the house, away from the rest of the family. And when we go to our warm, familiar rooms at the end of the evening, Dorothy, our ancient servant, will lead you up a different staircase, and then along several dark passages, into an apartment that has not been used since a very old aunt died in it more than 20 years ago. Will that frighten you? Will you be content in your large room with very high ceilings and very little light? The walls in this room are hidden behind dark, heavy tapestries, and the bed is covered in material appropriate for a funeral. Will your blood run cold when you enter? Will you be happy to spend the night there alone, with nobody close enough to hear you if you shout or even scream?"
"But that will not happen to me, I am sure," said Catherine, in a trembling voice. "You are describing what happens in novels."
"But what are they based on? Think about the furniture you will find in your apartment. Not tables, wardrobes, or drawers. But in a dark corner you might see a broken violin, or a tall black cupboard from several centuries ago. And over the fireplace, an oil painting of a handsome military man whose eyes seem to follow you round the room. And Dorothy, before leaving you, tells you that you will be alone in this part of the house, with only the ghosts of the past to keep you company. With these parting words, she disappears down the dark hall, and you listen until you can no longer hear her footsteps. You hurry to the door, wanting to lock it. But there is no lock or key.
"Oh, Mr. Tilney, how frightening! It is like a scene from Udolpho, but it cannot really happen to me. I am sure your housekeeper is not really Dorothy, and there are no ghosts at Northanger Abbey, are there? What else might happen?"
"I think you will feel frightened on your first night, but nothing unusual will happen to you. Not on that night. You will go to bed and get a few hours of disturbed sleep. But on your third night, there will probably be a violent storm. The thunder will be so loud and so frequent that the whole abbey will shake. A terrible wind will accompany the noise, and when the lightning flashes, you will see movement behind the heavy tapestries. Because you are naturally curious, you will get out of bed to investigate, and behind a tear in one of the tapestries, you will discover a small secret door. With your lamp in your hand, you will pass into a small, dark room."
"No, I could not go into the room. I would be too frightened."
"But you would enter, because Dorothy has told you about a secret underground passage between your apartment and the Church of St. Anthony, less than 2 miles away. Could you resist such an adventure? No, you will go into the small dark room, which leads to several more tiny rooms. You will see a sharp knife in one room, drops of blood in another, and in a third, chains and a whip. Finally, you find a large old-fashioned cupboard, and when you unlock its doors, you find drawers, one of which contains many mysterious sheets of paper. You hurry back to your room with this treasure and begin to read. You have found the diary of Matilda, a poor unfortunate girl. Have pity on me, and your lamp suddenly goes out and leaves you in total darkness.
"Oh, no!"
cries Catherine.
"And then what? Please go on."
But Henry could not continue telling the story without smiling, and Catherine at last understood that he was amusing himself by frightening her. Catherine felt ashamed of desperately wanting to hear more of the story, and told herself to remember where she was.
"Mr. Tilney, you are a good storyteller, but you have not alarmed me. Your sister would never put me in a room like the one you have described. I am not afraid of anything at Northanger Abbey," insisted our heroine. Just then, the Abbey came into view, and Catherine found that she was more than a little disappointed. Parts of the building were very low, and she could not even see an ancient chimney. But it was a real abbey, and she was delighted to be there, even when she saw that the hallway and informal sitting room were very modern and decorated with elegant furniture. She had to admit that this was not what she had wished for. She had dreamed of entering a scene from Udolpho, but instead found herself in a richly decorated, beautiful, comfortable home. Soon she was taken to her own room by Eleanor, who asked her to be ready for dinner in 25 minutes. This room was nothing like the one that Henry had described. There was pretty paper on the walls and a lovely carpet on the floor. Everything, in fact, was very handsome, comfortable, and even cheerful. She was determined to change her clothes quickly and be early for dinner, because she did not want to risk upsetting General Tilney. But suddenly she noticed a large wooden chest at one side of the fireplace, and she forgot about the General and the need to hurry. "This is very strange. I did not expect such a sight as this. What an enormous chest! Why is it hidden in this corner, almost out of sight? I should not, but I will look inside. I must do it now, while there is still light outside. If I wait until evening, my candle may go out."
Without hesitating, Catherine tried to open the old oak chest, but had trouble with the lock, which was made of ancient-looking dull silver. The handles at each end were broken, perhaps by some awful violence, and in the centre of the lid there was a silver plate with some mysterious writing which she could not understand. Could it say Tilney in a foreign alphabet? Or did the chest not originally belong to the family? By what strange events could it have become theirs? Catherine's curiosity grew by the second, and she became more and more determined to open the chest. With trembling hands, she had just managed to turn the lock and lift the heavy lid a few centimetres when a servant knocked on the door. Catherine dropped the lid immediately, and it came down with a tremendous bang. "Miss Tilney has sent me, miss." "Do you need any help with dressing for dinner?" asked the servant.
This kind offer brought Catherine to her senses and reminded her of what she should be doing at that moment. She dismissed the servant and rapidly changed her dress, although her eyes kept returning to the chest. She was ready so quickly that she believed she had time to examine the chest again. She hurried to the corner and, with all her strength, threw back the lid. She was astonished to discover a beautiful new white blanket, folded neatly and resting at the bottom of the chest, and nothing more. Catherine was staring at the blanket when Miss Tilney, hoping that her friend would be ready for dinner, entered the room. "It is an odd old chest, isn't it?" said Miss Tilney, as Catherine hastily closed the chest and turned away from her friend's eyes. Our heroine was blushing and feeling ashamed of her wild imagination. "It is impossible to say how long that chest has been in our family," continued Miss Tilney. "I do not know why it was put in this room, but I have left it here because it is handy for blankets and sheets. And in that corner it is out of the way." Catherine could not speak, but made herself calm down and hurry down the stairs with Eleanor to join Henry and General Tilney in the dining room. The General insisted on punctuality and was looking at his watch as the two young ladies entered the room. He violently pulled the bell beside the fireplace and shouted, "Dinner to be on the table immediately!" Catherine felt extremely nervous as she took her place at the table, worried about offending the General and cursing her own interest in old chests. The General scolded his daughter for making their guest hurry down the stairs, and then recovered his politeness. Catherine was distressed at having caused Eleanor any discomfort, but the General was so kind and attentive towards her that with this and a healthy appetite, Catherine soon recovered her peace of mind and began to enjoy being at Northanger Abbey. She actually felt a very positive sense of happiness. The dining room was large and elegant, with a very grand table and a number of servants attending to the diner's needs. "This is a beautiful room," Catherine commented. "It's a good size," agreed the General. "I believe that a large dining room is necessary in a house like this. But I suppose you are used to much grander dining rooms at home and at Mr. Allen's house." "No, not at all," was Catherine's honest answer. "I have never seen such a large dining room in my entire life." The General's mood brightened when he heard this, but he politely said, "I am sure that there is more comfort in a smaller dining room. I am sure that Mr. Allen's house has everything in the correct size for perfect happiness." Before the party retired for the night, a violent storm started outside, and as Catherine reached the door to her room, she listened to the wind and rain with sensations of wonder. The night made her think of the horrible scenes which Mrs. Radcliffe's buildings had witnessed. She knew that in a house like Northanger Abbey, which was so modern in many ways and so securely guarded, she had nothing to fear. And so, after noticing that Eleanor's apartment was very close to hers, she entered her room with a reasonably strong heart and steady nerves. Catherine looked across the room and saw the window curtains move, and so she forced herself to step boldly forward, and, while softly whistling a little tune, she courageously looked behind each curtain and found nothing unusual. Then she glanced at the chest beside the fireplace and laughed at herself for worrying about anything in this very pleasant room. "I will take my time getting ready for bed. and I will not worry if the fire goes out." Catherine felt satisfied with her own determination to be brave and normal. She happily prepared herself for bed and watched the fire die away. But just as she was ready to climb into bed, she spied a tall, old-fashioned black cupboard, which she had not noticed earlier, and which looked like the cupboard Henry had described in his fictional room. Had he, in fact, been talking about this particular cupboard? Catherine took her candle and examined it closely. It was very handsome, black with gold handles, and very old. The key was in the door, inviting her to look inside. So, placing the candle very cautiously on a chair, she seized the key and tried with all her strength to turn it, but it would not move. Alarmed, but not discouraged, she tried it another way, and the key turned in the lock, but the door would not open. She paused a moment, listening to the wind roaring down the chimney and the rain beating against the windows, and everything seemed to warn her not to open this mysterious cupboard. But Catherine knew she would not be able to sleep until she had seen what was hidden within. She tried the key again, moving it in different directions until the door suddenly opened. Catherine's heart leapt at such a thrilling victory. Now she saw a variety of drawers of different sizes, and she bravely began to open them and examine the interiors. Each was equally empty. But Catherine had read enough novels to know that such cupboards often had secret, hidden sections, and so her search continued, and she was successful. By opening a door behind the first set of drawers, Catherine discovered a roll of papers that had been pushed back into the furthest part of the cupboard. Her heart trembled, her knees shook, and her cheek grew pale. With an unsteady hand, she seized the precious treasure and was determined to read every line before she attempted to rest. Could it be the diary of Matilda, the young woman Henry had told her about? But then something horrible happened. Catherine's candle was blown out by the wind from the chimney, and she was left in total darkness. She heard footsteps outside her room, and a door banged shut. By now there was a cold sweat on Catherine's forehead, and she was trembling from head to foot. The papers fell from her hand as she jumped into her bed and hid beneath the blankets. To close her eyes in sleep was impossible. Her thoughts were going in every direction. Had Henry intended her to find Matilda's diary? How long had it been hidden in the cupboard? Would she be the first person to discover its secrets? She was determined to read the diary, which she was sure she had found, as soon as there was enough sunlight to see. Hour after hour passed, and Catherine could do nothing but listen to the terrible storm, which seemed to be warning her of hidden dangers, and pray that morning would come quickly. A servant entered Catherine's bedroom at 8 o'clock the next morning and opened the curtains. As soon as she was alone again, Catherine leapt from her bed and gathered up the sheets of paper she had left on the floor. Then she jumped back into bed to enjoy the luxury of discovering Matilda's secrets while resting on her pillow. Her greedy eyes glanced rapidly over one of the pages. She was surprised by what she found, and quickly looked at several more pages. All of them contained household lists of laundry items. Shirts, socks, underwear, gloves, ties. Or lists of household purchases. Writing paper, pens, hair powder, shoes and string. These lists and nothing more were the secret documents that had filled her with excitement and robbed her of half her night's rest. She blushed to think that she had learned nothing from her experience with the chest beside the fireplace. How could she imagine that she would find a family secret in a guest bedroom? Catherine hurried to get ready for breakfast, hoping that Henry Tilney would never know that she had spent her first day at Northanger Abbey behaving like a fool. Chapter 8. A Gothic Interpretation of Reality. Catherine was extremely impressed by the elegant breakfast table, and she made a pretty comment about the beautiful plates and cups.
"I am pleased that you approve of my choice," General Tilney responded. "These dishes were manufactured in this county, and I believe the set is as fine as anything from the continent. In fact, I hope that soon I will have the opportunity of selecting another set of dishes from the same company, although this time not for my own dining room."
Catherine was probably the only one of the party who did not understand what the General was hinting at. Soon after breakfast, Henry left them for a 3-day visit to Woodston, where he had parish work to do. As the other three watched him go, Catherine asked his father, "Is Woodston a pretty place?"
"Over the last few years I've tried to make the house and gardens a suitable place for my son," General Tilney explained. "It is a family living, and I want Henry to be happy there. Of course his clergyman's salary is not important, although he could easily live on it. What is important for any son is to have a job, to be employed in worthwhile work. Even Frederick, my eldest son, who will inherit one of the largest pieces of private property in the country, has his profession. I am sure that your father, Miss Morland, would agree with me."
Catherine could not answer for her father, but she was very impressed with everything General Tilney had just said.
"Now, last night you mentioned that you would like to see the rest of Northanger Abbey. It would be my privilege to show you the house and the gardens, if you can be ready to go out in 5 minutes. I will wait for you, young ladies, at the front door."
Catherine would have preferred to go around the house with only Eleanor, and her disappointment showed on her face. "I hope you do not mind joining my father," said Eleanor, almost apologetically. "He always walks out at this time of day." Catherine thought it was odd that the General always took his walk so early. Neither her father nor Mr. Allen did so. It made her wonder about her host. She certainly wanted to see the house, but she had to admit that she was not very interested in seeing the gardens. Nevertheless, when Catherine was outside, being guided around the exterior of the Abbey, she was more impressed than she could ever have predicted. She admired the size, the design, the beauty of the buildings, as well as the wonderful gardens. General Tilney considered her reaction and all of her comments both pleasing and appropriate, especially when she made it clear that nothing in Fullerton, not even on Mr. Allen's land, could compare to what she was seeing at Northanger Abbey. Finally, the General said,
"Here is a handy door. I think you young ladies are probably ready to go inside and get warm."
"But I will take our guest down this narrow path," said Eleanor. "It is my favourite walk. Will you join us, Father?"
No, Eleanor. It is cold and damp along that path. I will go across the park and meet you later. But don't show our guest around the inside of the house until I join you.
As the young ladies walked along, Miss Tilney said, "This was my mother's favourite walk, and brings back memories of her." "I am surprised, then, that the General would not enter it. Your mother's death must have caused great grief and distress."
"Yes, and it causes more pain every year. I was only 13 when she died, too young to understand that I had lost a constant friend whose love and advice I could rely on."
Catherine wanted to know more about Mrs. Tilney, and eagerly asked many questions. "Was your mother a charming woman? Is there a picture of her in the Abbey? Did this dark path reflect something sad in her?" As Catherine listened to Eleanor's answers, she came to the conclusion that General and Mrs. Tilney had had an unhappy marriage. He did not love her favourite path, so how could he have loved her? And there was something in his handsome face that told Catherine he had not behaved well to his wife. "Is the picture of her in your father's room?" was Catherine's final question.
"No,"
answered Eleanor quietly. "My father was never satisfied with the picture, and would not hang it in the sitting-room or in his apartment. After Mother's death I found it, and hung it in my bedroom. I will show it to you, if you would like to see it." Catherine believed this was one more proof that the General did not love his wife, and must have been extremely cruel to her. She knew this kind of selfish, unfeeling man from her novels, and as he led her around the house, she came to the conclusion that General Tilney was the type of man that Mrs. Radcliffe often wrote about. Someone with dark, dangerous secrets, a man who lived by his own rules. The General proudly pointed out the many modern improvements he had made to Northanger Abbey, as they walked through the living rooms, the kitchens, the offices and the storerooms. Everything had been done to make the house both comfortable and efficient to run. But Catherine wondered if there was anything left of the original 15th century building. Had every ancient treasure been swept away for the sake of domestic economy? They finally returned to the chief staircase and walked up to examine 3 large guest rooms which had been decorated in the last 5 years.
"We hope to have other guests from Fullerton staying here in the future,"
said the General, and Catherine was pleased by this kind thought for her family. At the end of this grand hall, they reached a set of large doors, which Eleanor began to open.
"No, Eleanor, Miss Morland has seen enough. There is nothing else worthy of her notice. We will retire to the library for a cup of tea after so much exercise."
Catherine watched as the heavy doors were closed, and believed that the General had excluded her from the most interesting part of the house. When she was alone with Eleanor, Catherine learned that the room in which Mrs. Tilney had died was behind those doors. She imagined that the General's guilt, not grief, kept him away from that room. "Has the room been kept as it was when your mother died?" asked Catherine eagerly. "Yes," answered Eleanor. "Even after 9 years, it is still exactly as she left it." "I suppose that you were with her when she died?" "No,"
said Eleanor sadly. "I was unfortunately away from home. Her illness was sudden and short. It had ended before I could return." Horrible pictures came into Catherine's head. Could Henry's father have caused his wife's death? That evening ended quietly, and as the young ladies retired, General Tilney said that he had to spend several hours in his office looking over some important papers. Catherine would not let herself believe that the General had business to take care of. She thought there was a deeper reason for his late hours, something that could only be done when the rest of the household was asleep. Catherine analysed what she believed were the facts. Mrs. Tilney's illness was very sudden. Her daughter was away from home at the time, and probably her sons were too. General Tilney was a jealous and cruel man. What was her conclusion? Perhaps Mrs. Tilney was alive, shut up for unknown reasons, and receiving a nightly supply of coarse food from a husband who had never loved her. The poor woman must be a prisoner in the oldest part of the Abbey, the part that Catherine was not permitted to see. She worried that her conclusions were too bold, but then she persuaded herself that all the evidence supported her opinion. Catherine was determined to find out more about the tragic life of Mrs. Tilney, and she watched for an opportunity to visit the mysterious rooms that the General did not want her to see. Unfortunately, Sunday was a busy day, and Catherine had to accompany the Tilneys to church. She sat with the family in their usual seats near the front of the church, and stared directly at a very elegant monument which had been built in memory of Mrs. Tilney, although Catherine did not accept this as proof of the poor woman's death. Our heroine's eyes filled with tears as she read the words recorded on the monument, which described Mrs. Tilney as a wonderful mother, a loyal friend, a generous neighbour, and, especially, as a loving and much-loved wife. She looked to her left, and was not surprised to see that General Tilney remained unmoved. This unemotional attitude, and the proud look on his face, strengthened Catherine's belief that he had in some way been his wife's destroyer. She knew this type of man. She could remember dozens of such cruel animals from her novels. Men who went from one crime to another, murdering whoever they chose without any feelings of guilt or regret. On the next day, Catherine had some time alone. Henry would not return until Tuesday, and both General Tilney and Eleanor were busy with their household duties, giving Catherine time to carry out her plan. She would go through the forbidden doors alone and search for proof of the General's cruelty. She was sure she would find something. Perhaps the veil Mrs. Tilney had worn to cover her desperate sadness, or the last few paragraphs in her journal, which she had written in a trembling hand. Catherine knew the way, and walked quickly and quietly through the heavy doors and on to Mrs. Tilney's room. She turned the key, opened the door, and was in the room. But it was several minutes before she could take another step. What kind of horrible scene did she face? What surprise took her breath away? It was a clean, beautiful, modern lady's bedroom. It was filled with handsome furniture, and the bright afternoon sun poured through two large windows which looked out on the most attractive flower gardens.
Catherine's common sense told her that this had been a cheerful place. She was filled with shame. How could she have assumed so much? She was sick of exploring and analysing. She only wanted to return quickly and safely to her own bedroom and to keep all her suspicions to herself. But just as she stepped towards the door, she heard footsteps, and as she entered the hall again, she found herself face to face with Henry Tilney.
"Mr. Tilney," Catherine cried, "why did you come up that staircase?"
"I always use that staircase. It is the easiest route from the stables to my apartment. And why shouldn't I use it? But may I ask why you were using that staircase? It does not connect with the passage to your room."
"I have been to see your mother's room," Catherine explained, blushing deeply.
"Really? Is there anything extraordinary to see there?"
"No, nothing at all,"
said Catherine. Then she quickly added,
"I thought you were not coming back until tomorrow."
"I finished my business earlier than expected." "You look pale. Did I alarm you by running so fast up those stairs?"
"Oh, no." "And did you have good weather for your ride?"
"Well, yes. But has Eleanor ignored you and left you to find your way into all the rooms in the house by yourself?"
"Oh, no, don't say that. She showed me most of the house on Saturday, and we were coming into these rooms, but then," whispered Catherine, "then your father stopped us."
"Have you looked into all of the rooms in this part of the house?"
"No. I only wanted to see you. Oh, isn't it late? I must hurry and get dressed for dinner,"
said Catherine nervously. "It is only 4:15, said Henry as they walked along the passage. For the first time in their acquaintance, Catherine wished to leave him, but he continued chatting. "My mother's room is very attractive, isn't it? Large and cheerful, with such a wonderful view. I am surprised that Eleanor does not use it for herself. She sent you to look at it, I suppose?"
"No,"
said Catherine, without adding any explanation. "So it was your own decision to visit my mother's room? Since there is nothing out of the ordinary there, I assume you went there to honour my mother's memory. I am sure that Eleanor has told you that the world never saw a better woman, but I still cannot understand the reason for your visit. What else did my sister say to make you curious about Mother's room?" Slowly, and with some hesitation, Catherine said,
"She said that her dying was very sudden, and that none of you were at home at the time. And I thought, perhaps, your father had not been very fond of her."
"And from this little information, you have come to the conclusion that my mother was badly treated in some way?" he continued, with cold eyes fixed on Catherine. "My mother's illness, which ended in her death, was sudden, but she had suffered from the same illness for years. Her doctors, very respected, capable medical men, were called and looked after her until she died on the 5th day. Frederick and I were at home and visited her repeatedly. She received every possible attention which we could offer."
"But was your father," said Catherine, "equally attentive during her illness?"
Was he full of grief and sorrow when she died?
Miss Morland, you have misjudged my father. He loved my mother as well as he could, and although I know that he was not the easiest man to live with, he valued her highly and sincerely, and he was truly, if not permanently, affected by her death.
I am very glad to hear that, Catherine began. It would have been very shocking otherwise.
If I understand what you are implying, you had come to a conclusion that is too horrible for me to put into words. What have you been basing your wild suspicions on? Do we not live in a civilized society, where laws and customs guide us? Do you not know us well enough to accept us as part of that society? We are not characters in a Gothic novel, Miss Morland.
They had reached the end of the passage, and with tears of shame our heroine ran off to her own room. She hid there, considering every disappointment that she now might have to face. She was terribly humbled, and she cried bitter tears. Would General Tilney learn what she had imagined? Would she lose Eleanor's friendship and possibly Henry's love? She hated herself more than she could express. But when the clock struck 5, she knew that she had to appear for dinner, although both her heart and spirit were broken. Henry was more polite than ever, seeming to know that Catherine was in need of a kind word and careful attention. Gradually Catherine began to feel better, and she started to hope that her foolishness had not cost her all of Henry's friendship. She had arrived at Northanger Abbey hoping to be frightened, and she had willingly turned what she saw and heard into a tragedy which could be traced back to the pages of the Gothic novels she loved to read. Charming as Mrs. Radcliffe's books were, it was not in them, perhaps, that human nature, at least in the middle counties of England, could be looked for and understood. Maybe Mrs. Radcliffe and her fellow novelists understood the character of the people beside the lakes and in the pine forests of the continent. But in the central part of England, murders were uncommon. Servants were not slaves, and neither poison nor sleeping pills could be bought at a local chemist's, like potatoes at a grocer's. She now believed that there was a mixture of good and evil in the English character, rather than the black and white described in her Gothic novels. With these thoughts in mind, Catherine decided that she would use her good sense in the future, and because of Henry's continued kindness and his unwillingness to refer to what had happened, she was able to be happy again. She listened to Henry with the greatest attention, knowing that she would be improved by what she learned from him. She still trembled when she glanced at the chest or the black cupboard in her bedroom, but she admitted that these reminders of her past foolishness were probably good for her. Chapter 9. Distressing Letters. When Catherine was completely calm again at Northanger Abbey, she began to wonder why she had not heard anything from Isabella. She was impatient for news from Bath, and she wanted to know that her friend and her brother James continued on the best possible terms. Isabella had promised to write, and had assured Catherine that she was always strict about carrying out her promises. This, Catherine thought, made it very strange that she had not received a letter from Isabella. Then, on her 10th morning at the Abbey, Catherine found a letter beside her place at the breakfast table. She opened it and found that it was from James.
Dear Catherine, this is not a letter that I want to write, but I think it is my duty to tell you that everything is at an end between Miss Thorpe and me. I left her and Bath yesterday, and will never see either of them again. You will learn the details from a different source, but I hope you will trust that my only mistake was to believe that my love was returned. Thank God I learned the truth in time. She has made me miserable forever. I hope that your visit to Northanger Abbey finishes before Captain Tilney and Isabella announce their engagement. I have been a fool, believing her words rather than the evidence in front of my eyes. I wish that I had never met her. Dearest Catherine, be careful how you give your heart.
Catherine sat at the breakfast table with tears running down her cheeks, and with Eleanor and Henry wondering how they could help her. Fortunately, General Tilney was hidden behind his newspaper and took no notice of his guest that morning. Unable to eat, Catherine hurried off to the sitting-room to be alone as soon as it was politely possible. Eleanor and Henry recognized that their friend was distressed and were very concerned for her, and so, after half an hour, they quietly approached her. "I hope you have not had bad news from Fullerton. Is your family all well?" Eleanor asked gently.
"They are all well, thank you. The letter was from my brother at Oxford."
Everyone was quiet for a few minutes. But then Catherine cried,
"I do not think I shall ever wish for a letter again. Poor James is so unhappy, and you will soon know why."
"I'm sure he is glad to have such a kind, affectionate sister. You will be a comfort to him if he is in any distress," replied Henry kindly.
"I have one favour to beg,"
Catherine said in a troubled voice.
"If your brother, Captain Tilney, is coming here, could you please give me notice, so that I may go away?"
"Frederick? Has this anything to do with your friend, Miss Thorpe?" asked Henry.
"How quickly you have guessed!"
cried Catherine.
"And now I understand why she has not written to me. But please, read what my brother has written."
Both Henry and Eleanor read James Morland's letter, and Henry said, "I am very sorry that anyone you love is unhappy, but I cannot believe that Frederick ever intended to propose marriage to Miss Thorpe." Then Eleanor asked, "What can you tell me about Miss Thorpe's family? Does she have any fortune?"
"Her mother seems a good sort of person, and her father is dead. They are not a wealthy family, and I believe Isabella has no fortune at all. But that would not matter to your family. Your father told me the other day that he only valued money because it allowed him to guarantee the happiness of his children."
Henry and Eleanor exchanged a look. Then Eleanor said, "I can imagine Frederick flirting with a girl like Miss Thorpe, but he would not respect her for treating her own fiancée so badly. He has never found a woman good enough to love, and this situation would not make him love Miss Thorpe." "You might be wrong this time, my dear sister," said Henry. "Surely Miss Thorpe would not break off her engagement to Mr. Morland before securing a promise from the other gentleman. You may delight in such a sister-in-law. Open, honest, lively, with strong affections, and nothing artificial about her emotions."
"That kind of sister-in-law
would be delightful," said Eleanor, smiling at her brother.
"But perhaps," observed Catherine, "although she has behaved so badly to my family, she may behave better to yours. Now that she has got the man she really likes and wanted, she may learn to be faithful."
"I trust she will be faithful to our brother," replied Henry, "unless she meets someone with more charm or even a better fortune. I think that is Frederick's only chance of escape."
"You are right. I think ambition was her only motive when falling in love. I remember when she found out what my father would do for her and James, she was so obviously disappointed. I have never been so deceived by anyone in my entire life. But that does not compare to poor James's feelings towards her."
"We must pity your brother at present," Henry said. "But we must not underestimate your loss. You no longer have a close friend to open your heart to depend on, to learn from. You will feel the loss greatly, won't you?"
Catherine thought for a moment, and then said, "No. To tell the truth, I am hurt, and cannot still love her. I will never hear from her or see her again, but I do not feel such grief as I would have thought."
To Catherine's surprise, this conversation greatly lifted her spirits. From this time, the subject of the affair between Isabella Thorpe and Captain Frederick Tilney was frequently discussed and analysed by the three young people at Northanger Abbey. Catherine learned, with some surprise, that Eleanor and Henry were in perfect agreement about one thing. Their father may not approve of Isabella's behaviour, but his greatest objection to her, as a wife for his elder son, would be that she was not socially well connected, and she had no money. Such thoughts made Catherine think with some alarm about herself. She was as socially insignificant and as poor as Isabella, and if the heir to the Tilney fortune could not propose to a woman without money, would his younger brother ever gain his father's permission to marry someone like her? This worried Catherine, but she thought about General Tilney's generous attitude towards her and the special attention she always received from him. Added to this, more than once she had heard him dismiss the idea that money was the most important thing in the world. During one of their discussions, Catherine said,
"Mr. Tilney, shouldn't you tell your father how Isabella has behaved towards my brother? Then he will be able to judge by her character rather than by her situation in life."
"No," replied Henry. "Frederick must tell his own story if he asks my father for permission to marry Miss Thorpe. But I must emphasize to you that I do not believe that will ever happen." The household went about its business, with no news from Captain Tilney, and so the General, who knew nothing about his elder son's connection to Miss Thorpe, was able to spend his time and energy making Catherine's time at Northanger pass pleasantly. He often expressed his anxiety about this task, worrying that she would be bored with the quiet life they led. He wished that there were more young people in the area, or more types of entertainment. He talked about hosting a large dinner party, or even a ball. But it was a dead time of year, and many of their friends were not at present in the neighbourhood. His worries ended one morning, at last, when he told Henry that he would bring Eleanor and Miss Morland to dinner at his son's house the next time Henry was at Woodston. "And
When do you think, sir, I may look forward to this pleasure?" asked Henry. "I am going to Woodston on Monday, and will have business there for at least 2 or 3 days." "Well, we will take our chances on one of those days," General Tilney answered. "There is no need to make a firm date. We do not expect anything fancy. Just whatever you have in the house will be enough. We know that a single man cannot be expected to produce anything grand. What about Wednesday? Yes, you may expect us early on Wednesday."
A ball itself could not have pleased Catherine more than a visit to Henry's house in Woodston, and her heart was full of joy with the idea of becoming acquainted with the place. Nevertheless, she was both surprised and a little sad when Henry found her and Eleanor in the sitting-room an hour later, and said, "I am here, young ladies, to say that our pleasures in this world must always be paid for. Look at me at this moment, because I look forward to seeing you both in my own house on Wednesday. I must leave now, 2 days before I had intended to go, and I would much rather stay."
"But must you go?"
Catherine asked, with a very sad face.
"Yes, I must. My old cook will be frightened half to death about preparing a dinner for my father. She will need as much time as possible to prepare everything."
"But the General told you not to give yourself any trouble,"
said Catherine. Henry only smiled, and as he left he said, "I wish I could reason like you." Catherine always doubted her judgment, and agreed with Henry's, so she had to think about this. How could people understand each other if they said one thing so positively and meant something else? Only Henry and Eleanor could interpret what their father's words really meant. The hours from Saturday to Wednesday passed very slowly for Catherine. Everything was quieter, even rather dull, without Henry. Then she worried that Captain Tilney might arrive, and she could not imagine acting politely towards him. She thought a lot about her brother, and felt sad at having lost Isabella's friendship. Her only feeling towards Northanger Abbey itself was now one of embarrassment, and the idea of a country parish with a comfortable house was much more attractive to her. Finally Wednesday arrived, and by 10 o'clock the carriage left the Abbey with General Tilney, Eleanor and Catherine inside. And after an agreeable drive of about 20 miles, they entered Woodston, a large village in pleasant countryside. Catherine looked around and believed that she preferred it to any place she had ever seen. They drove through the village, looking at the neat houses, charming shops and tidy gardens, until they reached Henry's house at the far end of the main street. It was a newly built, large stone house, and, as they drove up to the door, Henry, with 3 or 4 energetic dogs, waited at the door to welcome them. When they were inside, the General, who seemed to think that Catherine would be disappointed by the house, began to defend it. "We are not calling it a good house. It does not compare to Northanger or to Fullerton, but we feel that it is decent and not inferior to the houses round here. I believe that there are very few clergymen in England with a house half so good." When the party entered the sitting-room, which was still without furniture, Catherine was delighted, and her comments satisfied even the General.
"What a prettily shaped room!" she cried. "It is the nicest room I have ever seen. And it has a beautiful view. You must decorate it soon, Mr. Tilney, and enjoy it."
I believe it needs a lady's touch," said the General, with a satisfied smile.
"Well, if it were my house, I would always sit in this room," Catherine declared.
Henry entertained his guests with a wander round his garden, a look at the stables, and then a walk through the village. At 4, they returned to the house for a delicious meal of many courses, which the General seemed extremely pleased by. At 6 o'clock, after General Tilney had had his coffee, the carriage was waiting at the front door for the return trip to Northanger Abbey. Catherine felt certain that she could not possibly misinterpret the General's behaviour that day. It seemed clear that he expected her to become his daughter-in-law. She only wished that she could feel as confident about his son's plans. The next morning brought the following unexpected letter from Isabella. Bath, April.
My dearest Catherine, I was delighted to receive your 2 kind letters, and I have 1,000 apologies to make for not answering them sooner. I am quite ashamed at being so idle, but in this horrible place one can find time for nothing. Thank God we leave here tomorrow, so please direct your next letter to me at my home, and write to me soon. I have not found any pleasure in Bath since you left. There is so much dust in the air, and everyone that I care about has left. I believe that if I could see you, I could put up with everything else, because you are more precious to me than anybody can imagine. I am worried about your dear brother, who I have not heard from since his return to Oxford. I fear that there has been some misunderstanding between us, and I am confident that you will make my position plain to him. He is the only man I ever did or ever could love. I trust you to make that perfectly clear to him. The spring fashions are in the shops, and the hats are simply the most awful you can imagine. I hope you are having a nice time at Northanger Abbey, but I am afraid you never think of me. I will not say anything against the family you are with, although I could, if I wanted, to be spiteful or ungenerous. I have learned that young men change their minds from one day to the next, and I am happy to say that the young man whom I dislike more than all others has left Bath. You will guess that I mean Captain Tilney, who, as you remember, was constantly following me and teasing me in the most flirtatious manner. But I know men too well to be fooled by him. He returned to his duties in the army 2 days ago, and I hope that I will never be bothered by him again. In the last 2 days he was in Bath, he was always flirting with Charlotte Davis, a rather plain girl. I refused to take any notice of him when I saw him on the street after that. What a contrast there is between him and your brother. Please send me news of dear James. He seemed so unhappy when he left Bath. Perhaps he had a cold or something else that made him feel unwell. I would write to him myself, but I have lost his address in Oxford, and I worry that he misinterpreted my behaviour in some way. Ask him to write to me, and we will sort everything out. I have not been going out in the evenings, except that I went to the theatre last night with the Hodges, after they teased me about staying in night after night. I had to show them that I was not staying in because Captain Tilney had gone. I went out to show everyone that I have a good spirit of my own. Do you remember Anne Mitchell? She was wearing a hat like the one I bought with you, but it did not suit her. I suppose it went with my odd face. At least Tilney told me so at the time, and said every eye was looking at me. But of course he is the last man whose opinion I would take any notice of. I wear purple all the time now. I know it is not the best colour for me, but it is your dear brother's favourite colour. Lose no time, my dearest, sweetest Catherine, in writing to him, and to me. Your friend forever.
How could anyone be so false, so dishonest? Not even kind-hearted Catherine could be fooled by so many lies and so much self-interest. In fact, Catherine was ashamed of Isabella, and ashamed of ever having loved her. Her excuses for her treatment of James were empty, and Catherine could not believe that she had been asked to write to her brother on Isabella's behalf. He had suffered enough, and would never hear Isabella's name mentioned by his sister, never again. When Henry returned from Woodston, Catherine told him and Eleanor about the letter.
"Your own brother has had a lucky escape," Catherine said sincerely. "And for me, I wish that I had never met Isabella Thorpe. I can see that she never had any true feelings for either James or for me."
"It will soon seem that you had never met," Henry said.
"But please explain one more thing for me," Catherine replied. "She was obviously pursuing your brother but did not succeed. But I do not understand Captain Tilney's behaviour in this affair. Why did he flirt with her and make her quarrel with my brother and then walk away from her?"
"I cannot explain my brother's motives, but like Miss Thorpe, he thinks very highly of himself. Until this time, he has not been hurt by his flirtations," explained Henry. "I believe that he never really cared for your friend."
"Well, I disapprove of this sort of behaviour," Catherine said quite angrily. "And I must say that I do not like Captain Tilney at all. I suppose that no great harm has been done to me or to my brother, but what would have happened if Isabella had lost her heart to him?"
"But we must first assume that Isabella had a heart to lose, which would make her a different young woman, and so she would have received very different treatment from my brother," replied Henry.
"It is good that you defend your brother," said Catherine.
"And you must defend your brother's position, and understand that he should not feel sad about losing Miss Thorpe. He has had a lucky escape. Your own sense of what is right and wrong is so strong that you have not even thought of revenge against your friend. I admire you very much for that."
Henry's admiration was enough to make Catherine feel better in any situation. She was determined not to think that Captain Tilney was completely evil. She decided she would never answer Isabella's letter, and she tried not to think about what had happened in Bath between those two ever again.